Today's presentation of The Bias Buzz is brought to you by Accuracy in Media, your leader in fairness and balance. Please follow us on all forms of social media at the conclusion of this presentation.
Welcome to The Bias Buzz. I'm Don Irvine, and he's Brian McNichol.
Good morning.
All right, lots of things to talk about this morning. First off, we'll talk about the Orlando terrorist attack, and the response that we're getting from the politicians, particularly President Obama. What do you think?
Well, he said talking about ISIS in regard of this is a distraction. He said it was part of the speech he slammed Trump for, calling him out for not saying the phrase Islamic terrorism, right? And so why is that? That's not a strategy. Talking about ISIS on this is a distraction. And I think we're about to have the debate of this campaign right now because, Trump's thing is we need to get tough on ISIS. We need to get tough on this ideology. We need to make it look unpopular and undoable and impractical. And Hillary's response was gun control. Right, and we'll see who measures up. And it'll be interesting because Hillary there was a poll out yesterday, taken over the weekend before Orlando could get baked into the news, which she had her longest lead yet, almost 10 points, 9-point lead. So it'll be interesting to see now it was a high water mark. She had just gotten the nomination, gotten all those endorsements from the president and Elizabeth Warren and so forth. It'll be interesting to see what happens and how America gauges those two responses.
Right. So what we have here too, so we have this guy Omar Mateen, and this terrible attack occurred in a gay nightclub in Orlando, but he had professed his allegiance, his support of ISIS, and yet you have the administration really pivoting away from that. They won't, as you said, they won't use, radical Islamic terrorism or there's kind of phraseology language in there. Trump basically kind of pushed Hillary into that. Though she did it kind of an offhand way. I thought it's well, if you want to, we can call it that, but I don't really know if it's necessary, kind of a thing like that. What did Obama say yesterday? He said, there's no magic phrase that turns this thing around. The White House also feels that using that kind of terminology only helps ISIS. I think that they stick their head in the sand. And then you mentioned gun control. This has been kind of that traditional, expected knee-jerk liberal reaction to these kinds of shootings that occur is that it's all about gun control, or the ACLU says it's those darn Christians. It's something else. It's not what it really is.
Right. It's we shouldn't hold all Muslims accountable for what the shooter did, but we shouldn't hold all gun owners either, right? They didn't do it. The one guy did it. And if he hadn't had a gun, what would he have done?
Right.
Because he was going to kill a lot of people. And apparently this has to do with perhaps he was gay and, he had heard the mosque he went to had a fiery anti-gay person who spoke there often. We must kill them for their good and for ours. And so he may have just decided, he couldn't live with that personal dichotomy anymore. It could be as simple as that, in which case, but the thing about it is, he made a point of, in the middle of all this going on around him, to call and say this is about ISIS. So ISIS is not part of his thinking, right? Part of dealing with these things and preventing this in San Bernardino and Fort Hood and so many others is getting at this ideology, taking it on, on the battlefields, on all the battlefields, the traditional on up to technological messaging and so forth, and standing strong against it. And what Trump and others are saying is Obama has not done that. He has been curiously absent from that battlefield. And why is that? Now Trump is starting to, people are saying, he's got his little games, he's playing with it, but he's getting people to think about, why have we gotten to this point? There was something else on the internet, terrorist attacks during their administration. And there was 20 something during W. There was 31, I think, during Clinton. There was somewhere in the 20s for H.W. Bush. It was, all those numbers were about the same. And then it's like 145 under Obama. Now, why is that? Why is that happening? Is that, something you're doing is not working. Some attitude that you're taking, some actions that you are or not pursuing are not working, and he refuses to look at that.
Right, and I think this kind of plays into. We also have the story that Mateen's wife knew about the planning of these things, and so there's a lot of debate also going on in terms of what her role is and whether or not she should be charged. I think that'll continue to develop. But this was definitely a premeditated. It was a very it was a planned event. Also it happened in a gun-free zone. I understand. On top of that, we have all these different kind of factors. Now, Trump has talked about, and this became a little bit of news, that in terms of he banned the Washington Post. He wasn't going to credential the Washington Post at his campaign events anymore because of dishonest reporting, as he put it, in essence, of what they had said for his remarks that he had made on Fox News about this thing you had just alluded to, what he had said about Obama and what was Obama doing with regard to all of this, where the Post suggested that Trump was basically saying that Obama is tied to this, this terrorist attack, and that's not what Trump said.
It's not.
It's not. And if you interpret that, I looked at it, maybe a little differently in a sense. As I thought when I looked at that statement, I'm just thinking like, well, he's just trying to point something out that Obama is kind of running away from his record on terrorism, on domestic terrorism. He doesn't want to talk about this issue. He doesn't want, if he a couple of things. One, if he identifies if it's a domestic terrorist operation, they failed. The FBI has investigated this guy and they let him go, basically. So that was an intelligence failure there. Plus, it's all that we can't offend the Muslims kind of a thing almost. You mentioned talking about what we're going to paint all Muslims with this broad brush. Basically, we're not saying that it's all Muslims. We're talking about radical Islam in this case.
Yeah, not all Muslims are doing it, but all the times it's getting done, it's being done by Muslims or the overwhelming majority. A couple of things they've suggested. They're the gun grabbers are, well, if you're on the terrorist watch list, then you should not be able to buy a gun. Okay, so if you there's no due process to that, right? They just say, we think Don Irvine should be on the list. He says some seditious things. We write you down. You're not eligible to get a gun. Okay, you don't even know it till you go to buy the gun and it comes back, right? There's no public record of this. They don't send you a letter saying you're on the list, right? They don't really want you to know. So what happens when the guy goes to buy a gun and he is turned away for that reason? You could have some problems right then. It may not be the first gun he ever bought, right? He may already own some. Also, there's no due process. You're depriving somebody of their Second Amendment rights without, any kind of proceeding, any kind of chance for them to dispute your facts, right? It's ridiculous. And it's not, why are the gun owners to blame? They didn't do it. Not all Muslims did it. This Muslim did it. This Muslim, inspired by other Muslims who are operating in our country and saying these things, did it in a country where the president is not standing up to this. And he can say, we're doing the prudent, we're not doing anything stupid and so forth. How did it get to 144 on your watch? What's your explanation? Because so far what you hear is, this is a distraction. This is not. This is, and I think next week's poll numbers are going to show that the American people don't think ISIS is a distraction part of this conversation at all.
Right, right, and this definitely hits close to home. It's another reminder, and now that it's happening during the campaign season, I think this is something that where Trump will benefit by this. I mean, he's got tough talk. The media is trying to rip him apart for that. The Democrats are trying to rip him apart for that, but he's at least the one talking about it, while the liberals, the Democrats they're all running away from it. When it comes to these guns, what I thought was interesting about this was the story that came out I talked about how the New York Times and the Washington Post, as they rushed to judgment on this and talking about the guns, is that this is all about the assault rifle. The AR-15 was used in this. Well, it turns out actually it wasn't an AR-15 used at all, and
which is a small caliber rifle,
right?
Not a high powered rifle. In fact, they tell you not to use AR-15s for deer hunting because one shot won't kill the deer. So you have to go up there and the deer's laying there suffering, and you got to shoot it again. Right?
It's a .223. I mean,
right.
it's a
basically a .22.
Yeah. It's a small caliber bullet, so it's not really going to. So then you had Alan Grayson come out and said, well, those AR-15s, they shoot 700 rounds a minute, and you try to shoot with that gun 700 rounds a minute, you're not. It's not going to work.
Well, I mean, the only way you could do that is if you could hold your trigger down and the bullets would keep coming out. That is not legal. That's a machine gun. You cannot buy those in the country. AR-15 is not a machine gun. You have to keep doing it.
Right. You have to keep.
You can do that 700 times in a minute. You can pull it off.
Right.
Not many people can.
And as I understand too, because the way the gun is manufactured, is that even though its maximum capacity is something like 600 a minute, it actually could not withstand somebody doing it to that degree.
Right.
It's it would the gun would fail on you. So it's not even a realistic thing. So they misidentify it. They try to go back and correct it, but they still are leaving people with the impression that it's this assault weapon or this assault style weapon. There's this continual misguiding, lying about what the guns really are. It just continues to go on and perpetuate. Nobody else goes out there and tries to figure that out. Now, one of the things I wanted to find out about this, I went to an NRA blog about the AR-15, and I think this is also something the media needs to they would do a good service if they would actually do this, but I don't think they'll ever do this. Is that remind people that AR does not stand for assault rifle.
Right.
It's actually Armalite rifle, which is the manufacturer of the rifle that when they created this thing in 1959. So, but people see AR-15, they're thinking, oh well, that all this talk, it must be assault rifle 15, and I just all these just misconceptions that go on.
Right. It's easy when you don't know and don't want to know, and you got your headlines and whatnot.
Right.
The other thing is though, Trump banning the Washington Post. So they put a headline on a story that said basically that he was calling Obama a traitor and saying he was involved with the Muslims who were doing the attacks. They changed the headline, and they say they changed it before the Trump campaign complained about it. I don't know. They probably, won't roll on that subject. But they also say, we're going to continue to cover Trump. Not going to make any difference in our coverage. Yes, it will. Okay, they did the Mary Berry did the same thing to him, and they were never again in the game on covering city government. After that, it really does block you out. You need to be on those planes. You need to be in those briefings. The other reporters kill you. You got it. There's no substitute for being there. Now, he has banned a lot of people, and supposedly, they get over being mad at you and they let you back in, right? But the Post has assigned 15 reporters to dog Trump every step of the way. Okay, they're making a commitment to destroying him, and so I don't think he's going to forgive and forget on them. I think they may stay out, and I think it will be crippling to them covering this election.
Plus, they're writing a book about him, and that's probably not going to be very favorable. Now, banning them just means he's not going to credential those. And then,
right.
And as you point out, there have been other organizations, Politico and Huffington Post, and others that that have lost those. But that means they can go and they can still cover the event as the public. They're just that they may have to compete with thousands of other people to get into an event rather than getting media access. So, yeah, it could have a crippling effect on them by doing so. Of course, they're standing up and saying, well, this is an infringement on the First Amendment. And,
it's not an infringement on the First Amendment.
And all of these kinds of things. And but Trump has said, look, the Post, if he becomes president, the Post will be welcome in the briefing room. He's not going to stop them there. But the media is trying to find a way to play this to their end and their angle.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of vitriol. It doesn't impede you. And if you're covering things that involve credentials, then you have to be responsible. You don't have to be nice, right? Like the people cover the Redskins and the Nationals, they can write bad things. Oh, the team was not very good yesterday. but you have to. It has to be responsible, and they have some power of review if they have the power to credential. So, the idea that he can't do it is not true, and the idea that it won't hurt is not true either.
Yeah, I mean, he can do whatever he wants on this basis. You mentioned earlier here about Trump, the poll numbers, really Hillary, gaining an advantage, and we'll see what happens when the next poll comes out. The Bloomberg poll that just came out had a 12-point advantage for Hillary. I guess I'm hoping that will change on the next go round, because with this one it was 49-37. And I always, I've been saying throughout this time we've been doing this podcast that no one had hit the magic 50% mark. So she's right there, though this could change it and maybe put this back to a much closer race. But Trump has got to he's got to get over this thing. So maybe all of this stuff that we've been talking about now will help him. I think he did suffer a little bit after the whole judge thing the previous week. But I don't think that Trump. Even so, I think even if Trump looks at the poll numbers, I don't think he's really going to modify anything. Trump is always going to be Trump, whatever it takes for him to be that, poll numbers notwithstanding.
Right, I think so. I think he has to be. He's trying to find that space now, and it's a different space than it was on the campaign, where you're just savaging people and strongest survive and so forth. And in some cases, that's he's reading from a teleprompter. He's making some concessions to normal political dialogue. But what makes Trump Trump is that he's not of that. He's different from that. He's disruptive change versus incremental change. And I think that you're at a point, especially if we're going to be under threat of these mass terrorist attacks in our cities, in the United States, on our soil, all the way till November. People are going to say, hey, we need a new approach to dealing with this. Incremental, more of same is not going to cut it.
Right. So yesterday, one of the things that happened was that we had the final primary in D.C.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people are paying attention, except maybe some of the people in D.C. for the local election side of it. It wasn't a contest, for between Sanders and Clinton at all. But now that was over, Bernie and Hillary met yesterday, but it didn't seem like really anything changed. I mean, Bernie's not saying, he's not really going out there to criticize Hillary anymore. I think he's getting on board in a sense, but didn't seem, based on that meeting, that he was planning on dropping out, that he was definitely going to stick it out to the convention at least.
I think they're trying to flip superdelegates, and they're going to keep trying, and there's no reason they shouldn't. It doesn't really cost a lot of money at this point to keep going, right? You're just doing rallies and keeping your name in the news and waiting on the convention to start. So why would he drop out? And then you can still get more for calling the unity call and so forth. I don't think he will hurt her. I think, they said, throughout their debates, either of us is better than any of them. So, and the Republicans said that too. That was almost every debate, no matter what else they went off on, they both said, yeah, I disagree with the secretary, but I will, her 1,000 times over those other guys. So, at some point he will fall in line.
Right. And as a result, not necessarily of the D.C. primary, but it was actually being called on before that, was that the Greens, they've kind of made a call and reached out and
Jill
said,
Stein's trying to
let's come on, Bernie, come on over.
yeah, and she is on the line as the president right now. And she didn't outright say it, but I think that she would happily, because she said, what she does say is, I'm a doctor, I'm not a politician, I'm just here because nobody else is here. If he wants to come along, I would totally like to talk to him about it. He won't do it for the same reason. He's not, not going to do anything that helps Trump, right? He thinks it's more important to hurt Trump, to stop Trump, than to, run as a Green Party or carry his movement forward or whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, it's an interesting appeal out there. I mean, it would, if Bernie would have even considered it or done it, it would have vaulted the Green Party into the spotlight. They really are kind of the fringe party. That would have changed the dynamic, at least for their end. I mean, it's a good PR ploy, to reach out and to do that. And their thinking isn't all that much different than what Sanders believes anyway. So ideologically, it's a good fit.
They've been trying to get him to call him for months, and he hasn't called them. So that kind of tells you what you want to know.
Yeah. So another story that came out last week after Hillary basically had sewn up the nomination was Chris Matthews spent his editorial on his show talking about Hillary, and I thought it was an interesting little piece that he had put in there because he's been a longtime supporter of Hillary. He made that known very early in the campaign that he was supporting Hillary. He definitely struggled throughout the campaign as Hillary struggled because it was kind of hard to talk about her when she was embroiled in scandal after scandal, and her campaign performance overall was just pitiful. She just was, just was not performing very well at all, across the board. But I just wanted to liken what he was saying. The thing that got me about it is that he's out there and what he's saying is that she conquered, Arkansas. She went down south and learned those politics, and then she became, first lady, and she kind of conquered that. She brought us, she introduced health care, and I thought, well, that was a complete failure, as I recall. Right. When she threw that out. Talked about her pain that she suffered when Bill had some problems, which he did not go into, right. And then went on to extol her virtues as Secretary of State. Once again, let's not talk about the email server issues and things like that.
Or Benghazi.
Or any of those kinds of things. But it was like, yes, Chris put his blinders on and said, this is Hillary, and this is why she's a great lady, and just totally ignored all the things. It's such a typical liberal media type of a thing for them to do.
And one of the last interviews he had with her, the questions are all like, you have a candidate running around promising the world and making totally unrealistic statements, and it's kind of more movement than politics. How do you deal with running against a movement like that? So in other words, your opponent is completely ridiculous. How do you survive running against a person who's completely ridiculous? But that's as softball question as you can. Chris Matthews is old line Washington. He is one of the few people in this country is for keeping things exactly as they are because it benefits him. He goes from, steakhouse to steakhouse, from, Washington cocktail party to Washington cocktail party. He doesn't want anything to change. Give me incremental, give me the same 8 years from now that it is now. That's his, line. That's all he wants.
Right. If there is a liberal Democrat establishment media person, it's Chris.
Right.
By far. I mean, if anybody has just towed that line, no matter what, it has been Chris. And yeah, he benefits by all of this. That's for sure. I think you're exactly right. Another thing that came out last week that was kind of shocking, and actually MSNBC actually had talked about this on Morning Joe. So Esquire magazine sent a liberal reporter down to the U.S.-Mexico border to kind of investigate, talk about the wall and illegal immigration and things like that. The reporter basically comes back and he supports Trump's call to build that wall, which is a pretty shocking revelation, something that they definitely didn't plan. I'll give Esquire credit for actually even publishing the article, because I would have thought in this liberal media, that would have been very easy just to kill that piece, I think, on the one hand, and just say, it never happened, it never existed. But they talked to locals down there, and they finding that people, they like to see that. And one of the reasons is that you had these, as the editor said, a lot of first generation who are legal immigrants that are not happy about what's going on.
They said, let them wait in line. My in-laws live about 50 miles above the border in south of Tucson. And so I went to see him one time, get pulled over for speeding in the town. And the guy, he's got my license back there. All of a sudden he just comes, jams it at me, says, slow down, Suarita, I got to go. And all of a sudden then I see this truck go by. And it's like one of those farmer trucks with the wood things on the side. And there are as many people on the back of that truck as you could possibly fit, like 70, 80 people scrunched together. And the truck is running from the cops through these desert roads. So, these guys are scared to death. So we go up there a mile, and there's Border Patrol, and they've all got their hands up, right? The next night, they live on the golf course, and comes down the 18th fairway. There's helicopters, cops on motorcycles, guys running away from them, trying to chase down people that snuck in the country, So when these people talk about this, they're talking about chase scenes through their yard, right? I mean, how much of your life do you want to live with chase scenes through your yard? It's a very different problem than what we are talking about here in Washington. To them, it is like it's a disruptor of life, and it goes on all the time, and it's darn risky, right? Because sometimes people get shot, and there's people, things happen in the desert. They leave things in the desert. There's people, dead people and so forth. I mean, it's a bigger problem for them. And when you go down there and you see it, you're like, okay, I don't know that this should dictate every facet of immigration policy, but it certainly should be part of it. Is that the people on the border, this is a big problem, and it is, by definition, criminal. Not only because the people are sneaking into the country, because you have some sympathy, they're trying to get better opportunity, but what is the difference between a coyote and a drug dealer, right? Not really any. You're bringing illegal things or people into the country. So you're dealing with criminal elements all the time, all in your midst, and who give the cops a run for their money. That's hard to live like that. That's a tough neighborhood.
Right, and I think part of the thing here too is that with what happened to this reporter really is just that, too many people, or most of the people, are commenting on this illegal immigration problem, the wall. They're cozy in D.C. All these political, they're inside the Beltway bubble, kind of a thing like that. They have not visited. They have not talked to these people. They have not seen what goes on. And as you say, they leave stuff behind. People who have ranches along the border, their property, their ranches are littered with just detritus that is left behind, and an occasional body for people who can't make it. And because the coyotes, they really don't care about you. They got paid. They're going to drop you wherever, and then you got to make your way across. And they might give you a jug of water if you're lucky. There's just a lot of issues there that people don't understand. And so it was interesting to see this guy goes down there with one point of view, and he comes back with a completely different point of view. I don't know. Maybe his relatives have disowned him by now after doing that. But
the other thing is, it was the boss that was on TV. It wasn't the actual reporter.
Right.
But what he said was, everyone they asked said, "Build the wall." He's like, well, some of them they mean a metaphorical wall, just really get strong on the border, and that may or might not be true, but every one of them, 100% said, "Build a wall," which I think is interesting.
Yep. All right. Well, we also have, we'll go switch gears here to just briefly talk about the upcoming vote in the UK and Great Britain on Brexit, the British exit from the European Union. This is an interesting thing. The momentum seems to be gaining for leaving, though I had asked a friend of mine over at Competitive Enterprise Institute, Ian Murray, who you know. So Ian actually wrote a blog post, and one of the things he says about the polls is that even though the polls are pretty close, but they're showing the gains are coming for leaving, is that he says the polls in UK's general election last year were off the mark. Huge question mark accordingly hangs over whether or not they're accurately reflecting public sentiment. So he's not even sure that those polls, based on the fact that they were so off last time for their election, that maybe they are not really reflective of what's going on. But it does seem that the press reports, though I am seeing a lot of reports in the media where it seems that the ones that want him to stay seem to have at least been getting their say out there and leaving that. I visited London once. I don't have a huge knowledge base of that. I look to someone like Ian to kind of give me some guidance on that. What are your thoughts about should they leave, should they stay? Where we're going with this?
Well, a couple of things. It does appear that the leave is catching up. Britain, they rely a lot more on online polls than we do here. Here, it's not really accepted as good polling unless you call somebody on the phone. The big news this week was, for the first time, the telephone polls also said that the leave was ahead. So it had been true online for some time, and I think that's why they were inaccurate the last time, was the reliance on online. I'm not sure, but I believe that's what the stories show. But so it does appear to have momentum. They are right now having a naval battle in the River Thames. The pros and the antis, they're out there. It's like a farce thing. And they're like, Bob Geldof has one of the boats, and Nigel Farage has another one. And like Geldof is naturally, he's playing real loud music, probably Boomtown Rats, right? they are trying to like get horns to drown out the music. So it's, they have these. They can take these things to farce, right? And we can't really do that here. Like we have too many people who are deadly serious here. We could never pull off something like that. But they seem to be having a grand old time in England. It's been going on all day, fighting about this. Personally, I think it's a good idea. I think you shouldn't be responsible for Greece's economic policy. Let Greece deal with Greece.
Right. I mean, and that's one of the arguments. Is just that is like why should the UK, why should Great Britain be tied to what happens in Brussels? Why does Brussels dictate what these guys have got to do? Great Britain. I mean, they're an economic power. I mean, they are a linchpin of the EU. Obviously, leaving could set up an interesting spiral potentially of others thinking like should we leave,
right.
The Eurosceptics and those kinds of things going on there, but and immigration was one of the things that pushed this movement.
Right.
This whole this open movement and things like that. Issues that are definitely concerning because we have seen what happens. We talked just about terrorism at the beginning of the show here, but the UK has got those issues. They're constantly monitoring that, and we saw what happened in France with that stabbing with this this guy. He goes and he stabs this police officer and the person who's working the police department. I guess it was his wife. All in the name of ISIS and everything like that. So there are issues. They need to be able to protect their borders and do things and control their own destiny and fate a lot more.
And that's what Trump is tapping into is this fear that it's not like, right now, I don't think he's saying it right. He's saying ban on Muslims coming into the country. That's not what's needed. What's needed is, no to President Obama's proposal to bring 65,000 people over, right? We can go case by case like we do now. But what we need to do, what Trump is tapping into is allowing these huge cadres of population of people who don't share your values is disrupting these countries. They can't operate. They can't run their school systems. They can't provide public services. There are parts of town that even the police dare not go. And we're like, right now, we don't have that. We could have it. We're not far from having it. But right now, there's an opportunity to not have that happen to us. And I think that's what he's talking about. And, it'll be interesting to see how that resonates.
Yeah. So we still have about, 8 more days? Yeah. 7 more days. What's today? So anyway, the vote's coming up. It'll be interesting to see how that happens. And we'll talk about that more after the vote has taken place. So one more thing. We'll switch from politics. And just go back into the Nats. They have a key series with the Cubs. They've got 2 games. They've split so far. Close games. Well played games overall.
Right.
So much better result for the Nats than the last time when they went to Wrigley Field.
Right. And you can pretty clearly see those are the 2 best teams in the league playing each other. They've sort of separated from the rest. I think the Mets are hurt, and maybe they could get back into it if they got healthy. There's no one in the Central. The West is thoroughly mediocre. This is the team. These are the 2 teams. You're going to see this again in October.
Yeah, so that'll be exciting. If they continue to keep at this pace, it will be a great season for both teams, and could easily see 100-plus wins for both teams by the time we're done here. All right, well, thanks a lot, Brian, for joining me today, and that's all the time we have, and tune in again next week for the Bias Buzz.